But there is a second use of the word proof in most languages, and that is evidence, indicators. That does not mean they are weak. For instance, I have been married to the same person for nearly 50 years. I cannot prove to you mathematically that she loves me, but I'd risk my life on it. I came to Spain on a jet aircraft. I couldn't prove to you mathematically that it would get me here, but I trusted it with my life. So we must not think that because we do not have mathematical proof, that we cannot have evidence that is very strong. And I want to bring that kind of evidence from several sources: the history of science, the philosophy of science, and possibly the results of science. So let's contextualize this in history. Modern science exploded in Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries under people like Galileo, Kepler, Newton, Pascal, Boyle, Faraday, Babbage, and so on. All of the people I've mentioned, and many more, were Christians. They were theists. They believed in God. And they were the pioneers of contemporary science. Now, historians and philosophers of science have been very interested in this, and they've asked the question, is there a connection between belief in God and the rise of science? And the general conclusion is, yes, there is a very deep connection. And C.S. Lewis probably put it best when he said men became scientific because they expected law in nature, and they expected law in nature because they believed on a lawgiver. Alfred North Whitehead, a brilliant philosopher and historian of science, said that Europe in 1500 knew less than Archimedes, who died in 212 BC. And yet, 200 years later, in 1700, Newton's Principia Mathematica had been written. Why was that possible? Here is North Whitehead's answer. It must come, he says, from the medieval insistence of the rationality of God. Isaac Newton is a very good person to think about because he discovered the law of gravitation and he put it into his book Principia Mathematica. And for him, it was a wonderful reason to believe in God. When he discovered his mathematical description of the universe, he did not say, I have a scientific explanation, therefore I do not need God. No. He said, what a marvelous God to do it that way. And the more he understood of the universe, the more he admired the God that had done it that way. Now, this is a very interesting thing to observe, because far from belief in God hindering scientific research, the argument goes the other way. Belief in God was the motor that drove scientific research. People believed in a rational intelligence behind natural phenomena. And so they believed science could be done. It's interesting that because it shows us that all scientists have faith, not necessarily in God, but they all have faith that science can be done. I say that because there's a very widespread impression that faith is a religious concept. It is not merely a religious concept. It's a normal word, faith, coming from Latin fides, which means trust, belief. All scientists are believers, as Albert Einstein once wrote. I cannot imagine a scientist without that faith. That is faith that science can be done. So let me put it provocatively. I am not in the least ashamed to be a Christian and a scientist, for the very simple reason that Christianity gave me my subject. So historically, there is a very strong connection between Christianity and the rise of science. But now comes the odd thing. You get people like Richard Dawkins writing books like The God Delusion and persuading many people that there is no need to consider the question of God because God is a fictitious Freudian figure with no real existence. And many people say to me, your God is like Santa Claus. Belief in God is like a child's belief in the tooth fairy. That's a very curious thing to say. I was debating a physicist in the Netherlands, and he said, your belief in God is like belief in Santa Claus. And I said, well, we should test that with the audience. So I asked everyone in the audience to put up their hand if they came to believe in Santa Claus as an adult. And there were nearly 2,000 people there, and there was not one hand went up. And then I said, how many of you came to believe in God as an adult? And hundreds of hands went up. And I turned to this physicist and I said, this is an absurdly childish argument. To put God in the same category as Santa Claus is foolish intellectually, because some of the best brains of history has spent years thinking about the nature of God and writing about the nature of God. There is no such literature about Santa Claus.
Like a grain of wheat